Captain's log 23241. With the vibes of the absolute coolest research librarian, Persist explores fashion philosophy, application, and nerdism. And sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Nerdism is used here to describe what I would call a certain cool niche expertise, basically a specific flavor of having a passion for a certain thing. It's a working definition. She exists at the intersection of fashion history and trend analysis that I find absolutely fascinating. Here are some of my favorite selected works. These city boy style breakdowns are an interesting look at how seasonal and regional style evolves, and how a certain style evolves over time itself.
If you're new here, city boy is a term coined by the Japanese lifestyle magazine Popeye, which has been around since the 1970s.
This process-oriented approach to how to build your style, from research, discovery, to organization, to application. If you're someone like me who loves kind of process design, this video just tickles like that perfect part of your brain.
Let's say you find your style. Out of all the aesthetics that we love to throw around, you find something that you think you'll be comfortable in, that you want to invest in, that you'll be wearing for a long time. How do you go about making that happen? I'm a process-oriented person. I'm a production coordinator. That's my day job. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the tools I use and my process to sort of go through the stages of discovery, referencing, categorization, and then implementation.
Finally, an examination of how age and time affects style. Like if you're ever wondering why the cool grandpas in your city are dressing better than everyone else, watch this video.
There's a couple of reasons for this. Young people are generally, all sort of responding to the same era of fashion that they're in. Whereas older people, I think often they will actually get settled in a certain era of their lives. So let's say they lived through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. They will pick up elements from each of those eras that worked for them. And then at that point in their lives, they've lived through so many different states of fashion. They've sort of created something a little bit new because it's taken pieces from all these different trends and then sort of settled into its own thing.
Where Persha examines fashion from a consumer perspective, Ken Sakata from Front Office Co. takes a similar approach, but from the producer-designer side of things. Blending a similar list of history, philosophy, and trends, Ken breaks down the thought process behind how he designs garments and builds his business. He brings this kind of hanging out over a beer, catching up with your mates authenticity that makes each video uniquely interesting. Some of my favorites are this breakdown of how he designs a workwear jacket.
You've got a couple of like chess moves within that once you have your little cloned Carhartt jacket. So your options are, you can iterate, right? You can change it a little bit. So you can make the fabric maybe a little bit more premium. So instead of 100% cotton, maybe you can use like a wool blend, or you can make it a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier, and you can make it Carhartt Plus.
Or this video breaking down denim history and modern reinterpretations. And finally, this video that breaking down the lessons that he's learned from building a brand.
At the time I was like 37 years old, and I treated it really as a giant adventure. I didn't feel like I had much to lose. Like even if the entire thing was a very public failure, it wouldn't change how I felt about myself. It wouldn't change my life 1 second. So I just treated it like a big adventure.
And if you want more of this kind of blend of fashion, history, philosophy, and trends, I recommend this podcast, Articles of Interest, specifically the season called American Ivy. I listened to it on road trip and it's absolutely amazing. Okay, time for Half Baked, my thoughts on just general stuff and things I've been thinking about lately. Specifically on the art of being bored. I don't know about you, but my attention span is shot. You've probably noticed this too, and how your ability to pay attention is degrading. It might not be entirely your fault. Recently, I stumbled on this video from Jared Henderson called Amusing Ourselves to Death, Why We Can't Focus, and it sent me down a rabbit hole that I haven't been able to escape. The essential argument is that we, as a society, have moved away from forms of communication and thinking that involve intensive thought.
So I'm breaking this problem down into 3 parts, and it all begins with a shift from books to television. So in the 1980s, Neil Postman wrote the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, and he was primarily interested in the cultural effects of a shift from using the written word as our primary way to transfer information to a shift towards mass media, and in particular, television.
The shift from books to radios to TV and now to short-form content is changing the way we think. When we consumed primarily the written word, we had what Neil Postman called the typographic mind. Essentially, we could read, think, and communicate in long-form ideas because we primarily consumed long-form ideas. But with radio and television and now short-form videos, that has been just drastically compressed. Because we consume mostly short-form thoughts, we can't communicate or engage on that deeper level. The medium is the message, as Marshall McLuhan puts it. This resonated with me and maybe you as I felt my attention span absolutely degrade over time. The more time I spent on these platforms, the less I could spend with my own thoughts. I couldn't dare to be bored. It wasn't until I introduced this radical change that I realized how far gone I was. I decided to block these platforms from around 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day. I had to fill these hours with something else, and surprise, surprise, my ability to engage came back. One of the most surprising changes I noticed is I started to listen to music a lot more. I used to listen to music all the time. It was a big passion of mine, making playlists, sharing those, etc., etc. But over time, that eventually got replaced by podcasts. Any chance that I would normally be listening to music, I instead switched to a podcast. My internal theory is that as my attention span eroded, I would listen to more podcasts because they would prevent my thoughts from trailing and for me from getting bored in any way. But as I started blocking these other platforms and allowing my brain to wander again, I began to listen to more music because I became more comfortable with being in that mental space, with allowing my thoughts to go away and come back with something else. This led me to do more reading, more writing, more creating, and do a lot of stuff that felt much more rewarding than doom scrolling. And platforms have learned how to exploit this. Our brains have an aversion to processes that require more energy. Reading a book or writing or thinking deeply burns more calories. That's just a fact. And through evolution, we've learned to avoid things that are more energetically taxing. Because when we were out on the savannah, being able to conserve energy was an evolutionary advantage. Now, algorithmic feeds take advantage of your brain's desire for that easier path. The moment you get bored, you can swipe to the next video and swipe and swipe and swipe, avoiding deeper thought for as long as you can scroll. There's a reason your best thoughts come to you when you are in the shower or on a walk. It's because your brain has space to explore and wander instead of being lulled into a perpetual state of amusement. The good thing is, though, is that our brains are incredibly elastic and we can learn to have this skill again. And that's something I've just been exploring recently about letting my brain learn how to be bored again, the art of being bored. There's a lot more here about the compression of ideas and the competition for attention, how that has eroded discourse. Hank Green's got a great video about it, and Kyla Scanlon's been on this beat for a long time. Highly recommend you read her Substack. I've started reading the stuff that Jared mentions in that video from Neil Postman and Marshall McLuhan. I've also been keen to read this book called Filter World by Kyle Chayka after I heard him talk about just this topic on the Ezra Klein show, which I definitely recommend you go listen to. It's a really interesting deep dive into how algorithms are shaping culture. And I think there's this really big idea here that a bunch of people have been kind of circling around and pecking at and yanking on the threads. And I'm eager to do a very much deeper deep dive into this and yank on that thread myself. But that's all the thoughts I have for this week. So catch you next time.